Bibles and turn with me to the book of 2 Corinthians. The book of 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. We're going to look at verse 17. We're going to depart from the series we've been doing, and we're going to be looking at the 4th of July. I was appreciative of the fact that when our song leader, Russ, stood up this morning for the Star Spangled Banner, he said, "Of course you know what you must do." And the thought went through my mind, kneel. For unfortunately, that's what many people think that they ought to do when they sing the Star Spangled Banner. Too many people are looking for America that is perfect, that has no flaws. This country was flawed from the very beginning. It always will be, because it is made up of citizens who are flawed. But that doesn't take away from the wonder and the majesty and the grandeur that God has made this country to be. And therefore our motto is true. In God we trust. And if we trust in God, we will be an example to the world. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17, just a short little verse, but it speaks very much to a history lesson we're going to be looking at here this morning. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is what? Liberty. There is liberty. Father, I pray that you be with us here this morning. Help us to, for a few minutes, separate our minds from all the cares of this life and all the things that might be pressing upon our minds, and help us to focus on your word. I pray, Lord, that the Spirit will lead and guide and direct in our message, and that people's hearts will be moved and changed. And Lord, we hope that this message will be going out over the internet, through our YouTube, that it might touch lives that are out there as well. And I pray this in your name. Amen. If we have fallen short in our public school systems, and I think we've fallen short in a number of areas, but the one area I think we have fallen short in more than any other is in the area of history. We're seeing a lot of that recently. People tearing down statues, monuments of various individuals who played a role in the shaping of America. If they don't tear them down, then efface them. They've even talked about pulling down the statue of Abraham Lincoln. I don't understand that one. But even talking about tearing down any monuments or statues to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. They do so without an understanding of history. One of the ones that they wanted removed recently is the one of Robert E. Lee. How terrible, he was a slave owner and he fought for the Confederacy. You're right. He was also a great man who had a terrific military career in the U.S. Army up to the Confederate War. Yes, he fought on the Confederate side because he felt that it was right to do so. Was it a mistake? Well, in hindsight, we might say yes, it was a mistake. But the man, after the war, was very kind to the black people, was a very godly man. And so we judge him not based upon his overall life, but we judge him based upon a 5-year part in his career. We don't understand history. Because we don't understand history, we then discredit many who played important and pivotal roles in our country. Now, I want to talk this morning about Christianity being the foundation of liberty, and I think this is a part of the history of our nation that is lacking. Because I think if our people had a better understanding of this truth, then our nation would be a lot better off and would have a lot less unrest, racial bias, riots, killings, and so forth. Let me explain what I'm talking about. 244 years ago, the representatives of 13 colonies, who says 13 is an unlucky number? 13 colonies voted to declare their independence from England. Now, in this declaration, it called upon their creator, God, the God of Christianity, the God of Judaism. They called upon that God as the basis for their decision. We find this in the Declaration of Independence where it reads as follows: "We hold these truths to be self-evident." Next slide. That all men were created equal. They were endowed by their what? Creator. It was certain, inalienable. That is, things that cannot be taken away. They were endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The important thing to note here is the fact that this was a declaration not of just the white. These men that were meeting here didn't say, well, just those who are born white are created equal. They weren't saying, well, just those from a certain nation who emigrated here are created equal. They said, how many human beings are created equal? All of them. I think the founders of our country recognized that slavery was taking away that truth away from those blacks, individuals from Africa who had been brought to the United States to serve as slaves. I think they were looking forward to a day when slavery would be abolished, when all in America would recognize and see, regardless of whether you're Native American, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Hispanic, whatever nationality you are from or background, you are considered equal here in the United States. Why? Because we're all tied in to the same God who created us all. And I believe that was their hope and their intention as they put those words in. Now, what we don't realize is that there was a section that was omitted in the final copy of the Declaration of Independence. It's too bad it wasn't left in. The man who wrote this section, and we're going to read it here in just a moment, the man who wrote this section is one who's been getting a lot of bad billing lately. Thomas Jefferson. I want you to read what he wrote because he was a slave owner. He owned up to 600 slaves over his lifetime. Listen to what he wanted included. He, speaking of the king, has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the person of a distant people who have never offended him. Who's he talking about here? He is talking here about persons of a distant people who never offended him. He's talking about black people in Africa. You'll see this as we go on. Captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This let me set that one again. This pirating warfare. I'll get it out. I can't get the other one out. It's one of those mornings. You know what? They spoke differently back in those days than they do today. Oh well. They were carrying out this pirate-type warfare. And they were taking opportunity, or using opportunity, of infidel powers. It is the wealth warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain, who determined to keep it open a market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce. You call yourself a Christian king, and yet you promote all these terrible practices, selling blacks into slavery and bringing them across the ocean, and many of them die in the process of coming over in terrible deaths, and then you bring them here to another hemisphere where they're really like fish out of water because they don't know the culture, they don't know the climate, and all of these things, and you put them into slavery. It's a warfare against mankind, he says. He goes on to say that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye. He is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the very people whom he has obtained them. You know what the king was doing? He was trying to get the black slaves that he stole from Africa, captured them, kidnapped them, however you want to put it, brought them here. Many of them die on the way. He sells them to the farmers down the south who buy them as slaves to put them to work in their farms. He does all of this. He's guilty of this. And now, because it suits his advantage, he now is trying to stir up among those slaves to rebel against the white farmers and to kill them for his advantage. When you read about this, you begin to understand why they were so dismayed by the king who would do these kind of things. And so, this was included in the original part of the Declaration of Independence, but was eventually eliminated in the final version. Now, Thomas Jefferson is the one who basically is saying slavery is a terrible thing. Slavery should not go on. It should be abolished, and the slaves should be treated as men should be treated. All are equal as created by God. You say, but isn't he a hypocrite? You know, some have said Jefferson was a hypocrite since he was born into a slave owner's home, and he himself owned some 600 slaves over the period of his life. However, they haven't studied history, because if they had studied history, they would know what Jefferson's views and what he did toward his slaves, and they would appreciate where he was coming from. See, Jefferson had this idea. If we're going to free the slaves and truly give them an equal status, then we need to prepare them for entering into society as free individuals. If we take them as they are right now, and we send them out, many of them aren't going to make it, and some who are going to make it are going to be living in poverty and have no opportunity to raise themselves out of that poverty. So Jefferson had this idea of how slaves ought to be treated, with the goal of eventually emancipating them into society as a profitable citizen of this country. Here's what he believed in. He believed in giving the slaves a trade. When he took over the farm, they were raising tobacco, and of course the Revolutionary War came along. He decided to switch from tobacco to wheat. Well, we basically needed slaves just 2 times a year, 1 month in the spring, 1 month in the fall, to take care of the wheat. He owned a lot of property. I think it was like 14,000 acres property he owned. So what he decided to do was, listen, I'm going to start up some businesses. One business was a blacksmith. Another business was they made nails. He started up several of these businesses on his plantation, and he put the black slaves into those businesses that they might learn a trade, so that if they be free, they would be able to go out into the community and they would have a way of making a living. Something also he believed in was you don't get a slave to work harder by torturing them. Incentives are a far better way of doing it. So what he would do, like for example, he would go down to the nail factory, I guess, that he had there, almost on a daily basis. He would go in, he would look over, okay, this individual here has produced 100 nails. This guy over here, he's produced 25 nails. This guy produced 50 nails. And so what he would do is he would give monetary incentives in front of everyone. So the guy that put out 100, he maybe give him, I don't know, $2. The guy did 50, he might get 50 cents, and the guy had 25, better luck tomorrow. And so it was for the benefit of the slaves to work hard. Their working harder wasn't just to benefit Jefferson, it was to benefit their own life. And so this is the approach that he took with them. He also believed in establishing the black nuclear family. You know, we know under slave trades that, blacks would marry, but then oftentimes the wife would be sold away, the children would be sold away, the husband would be sold away, and so forth, and it kept breaking up the nuclear family. He didn't want that. In fact, when slaves would get married, he would build them a house so they would have their own house in order to raise their own children. It was actually his goal that by the time he retired and then died, that hopefully the slaves would be set free from his plantation. Unfortunately, when he died, he was in such great debt that most of them were sold to pay the debt off, and that was unfortunate. I'm going to tell you something right now. He was ahead of his time, because see, if his theory had worked and others had embraced it as well, we probably would have not only not had all of the racial and issues, or at least not to the degree that we have them today. There probably would have never been a civil war. And there probably wouldn't be all the poverty that many of the blacks seem to be stuck in today. I've got a good friend of mine who's black. He's down in Florida, and we email each other, and occasionally we talk on the phone. And you know what he's told me? He has told me, he said, the greatest needs that the black people have today, number one, a nuclear family. He said what's happening is that most of the young men and young women that are growing up in black communities who are black never know who their father was. They grow up without a father. And because they grow up without a father, they turn out to be individuals who don't know how to deal with life. He said what we need is we need to strengthen the nuclear family among the blacks if we hope for the blacks to raise themselves out of the poverty. Interesting. Jefferson's very thought. In fact, in one case, one of the slaves who was married came to Jefferson, and his wife was actually owned by a different slave owner, and he came to Jefferson. He said, Jefferson, the slave owner is about ready to sell my wife off to another slave owner. Can you help me? Jefferson went to the auction. He paid $600 of his own dollars to purchase that woman so that that woman might remain with her husband. Another real problem that we have with the black communities today is the matter of providing them the training they need so they can make a better living and take themselves out of poverty. My black friend shared with me, he said one of the worst things that's ever happened to the blacks happened back in the 60s when government tried to help them out by giving them all kinds of money and welfare and subsidies and houses and so forth. He said by doing that, he said it's locked them into their condition. He said, I wish they had never done that, so that the blacks would have had to work hard and in the process gotten themselves out of their condition, and in the process would have arrived on an equal status with the whites and other nationalities here in this country. Jefferson's idea was a good one. I think in our society today we need to be careful that we don't jump to conclusions or go because and make decisions about who we're going to look up to and who we're going to brandish and so forth before we know all the facts. And I think history can help us greatly in this very issue. Well, let me move on. The colonists were seeking independence so that they might pursue the course of liberty, which had been now denied by the King of England. Some have said, well, doesn't the Bible say in Romans 13 that we are to submit to the authority over us? And you're right, it does say that. But what you don't take into consideration is that the colonists had certain contracts that they had made, and agreements they had made with the king, that because they were so far away from England, that they would have certain freedoms to govern themselves and to do some of these things. And the king had violated those contracts in a number of areas. Therefore, they felt that because the king had done these things, and they feared where he was continuing to go in these areas, that they then were right before God to declare their independence. And so they did. They wanted liberty of religion and conscience. They were afraid that things were going to be like the way they were in England and in Europe as a whole, where one church was recognized by the state, and any other church, if you were of a different denomination, you'd be persecuted. I mean, in some situations, if you had the wrong version of the Bible, you could be put in prison. They didn't want to see that here in America. They wanted to see a true freedom of liberty when it comes to the matter of religious worship. So that on the same street you can have 3 different churches, all who hold different views about Christianity, and they can all worship freely without fear of persecution. That's what they wanted. And what they foresaw the king doing was forcing the state religion of England upon all of the colonies. And they felt that they couldn't do. They were looking for the liberty of self-government to determine what would be law and what would not be. By the way, I think we're in that condition today. We as Americans often would like to see government make certain decisions that we feel would be appropriate, and yet they seem to be going the opposite direction. And it frustrates us. I mean, I could ask for a show of hands here this morning, but I'm not going to. But I imagine if I asked for a show of hands, how many of you are frustrated with our government right now? I imagine that most of you would raise your hand. I am. I'm frustrated to see what's going on in Congress right now, where nothing really is getting done. And the reason it's not getting done isn't because there aren't things that need to be done. It has to do with the fact one side wants to have its way and the other side wants to have its way, and neither is going to give. Do they not stop and remember that they are in office because God placed them in office, and they will be answerable to God someday for the decisions they make as they serve the people, not themselves? Fortunately, they're doing more to serve themselves than they serve the people. They wanted a liberty of private ownership. Often the king would come in and seize homes and goods and put them to work or put them to use in his army. They wanted liberty of self-determination, which we already talked a little bit about. The government could not force themselves to serve in the king's military or even fight against their own countrymen, which is what the king was doing. Finally, they wanted a liberty of justice. Boy, I'll tell you what, I think we need this today. The liberty of justice says, I can be tried by my own peers, and I am innocent until proven what? Guilty. In most countries of the world, you are guilty until you're proven innocent. And we are rapidly falling into that in our country today. As we hear differing things come out in the news, we jump on the bandwagon and we immediately say, oh, okay, we've heard this about, well, then he's guilty. Now, we saw this recently. You know, when somebody leaked out some report that supposedly Russia had put a bounty out for the number of American soldiers that could be killed by the Taliban. You remember hearing about that? And all the news media jumped on it. President Trump, where was he? You know, and he was informed back in March, and he didn't do anything about it, and he's guilty, he's guilty, he's guilty. Whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? And it eventually came out, he was never informed, first of all, because they could never confirm that it was true. He was innocent, but they proved him guilty. And we're seeing this more and more in our country today. Where are we coming from? The problem is, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is what? Liberty. But the Spirit of the Lord in our country is quickly diminishing. For that reason, I see erosion of our liberty today. Now, the root cause of our erosion is the decimation of Christianity. The decimation of Christianity. Christianity was seen by our founding fathers as the very heart of a successful democracy. And because of this fact, it was their intention of our founding fathers that Christianity should always remain the heart of this country, and therefore the democracy upon which it was established would remain strong. That's what our founding fathers wanted. Now, from the time of the Revolution, and it was over, and our country was established, and the Constitution was established, from that time on, there have always been those individuals who want to totally strip from society all religion. And they have, over the years, continually tried to get Congress, if not Congress, Supreme Courts, whatever, to try to pass laws that would restrict, if not take away, our religious freedom. If you look through the history, you'll see that this went on quite a bit. Now, I'm going to give you a reference, and I'm going to read quite a bit here for you. It's going to be up on the screen. I put it purposely on the screen because I want you to see it. This comes from the 33rd Congress of the United States, 1854. A strong effort was made to abolish the office of chaplains in the Army, Navy, and 2 houses of Congress on the ground that the Constitution, it constituted an infringement of the principal separation of church and state. The following was the conclusion of the Committee on the Judiciary of Chaplains in Congress and in the Army and the Navy House of Representatives. This is what they concluded 75 years after the end of the Revolutionary War. I want you to read and see what they communicated. Down to the Revolution, every country did sustain religion in some form. In other words, religion has been a part of our country from the very beginning. It was deemed particularly proper that the religion of liberty should be upheld by a free people. You want to have a free people, you had to have what? A free realm for religion. Had the people during the revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. Isn't that amazing? At the time of the adoption of the Constitution and the amendments, the universal sentiment, this was universal, everyone was on the same page. It was their sentiment that Christianity should be encouraged, not just any one sect, but Christianity as a whole. Any attempt to level or discard all religion would have been viewed with universal indignation. Your committee concede that the ecclesiastical and civil powers have been and should continue to be entirely divorced from each other. Now, don't jump to conclusions here. He didn't say you can't have prayer or other things. What he was saying is the government should have no authority over religion, and religion should have no authority over government. Okay? In other words, no one religion can tell government this is the way things are going to go. By the way, that did happen during the Middle Ages and so forth. And the government is not to interfere with the freedom of religion, which we are seeing happening today, aren't we? But we beg to leave to secure ourselves from the interpretation of asserting that religion is not needed to the safety of civil society. In other words, just because the two are separated doesn't mean and doesn't leave room for this interpretation that religion is not needed. We need it if we're going to have a civil society. It must be considered as the foundation on which the whole structure rests. Laws will not have permanence or power without the sanction of religious sentiment. Did you catch that? You know why laws do not have the power today, as we see them rioting and doing the things that they are in our society today? You know why they don't have an impact like they used to? Because religion is being decimated from our society. And without it, we cannot have a civil society. They go on to say this: without a firm belief that there is a power above us that will reward our virtues and punish our sins, in this age there can be no substitute for what? Christianity. For Christianity. In other words, Christianity is the basis upon which this democracy can flourish and remain strong. That is the general principles. Is a great conservative element on which we must rely, and up comes Malwarebytes, excuse me just a minute, by which we may rely on the purity and permanence of free institutions. That was the religion of the founders of the Republic, and they noticed this, they expected it to remain the religion of whom? Their descendants. Not Islam, not Buddhists, not Hinduism. They expected that Christianity would remain the basic religion of this country, and it was essential for freedom and liberty. There is a great and very prevalent error on this subject in the opinion that those who organized this government did not legislate on it by making it free to all. The error has risen from the belief that there is no legislation unless in permissive or restrictive enactments. In other words, unless there is some statement put into the Constitution that says Christianity is the foundation of this country, or Christianity will not be the foundation of this country, well then therefore there's nothing regarding in the Constitution regarding Christianity and its role in government and its role in public life. And they're saying that's an error to think that. Making a thing free is as truly a part of legislation as confirming it by limitations. In other words, by the fact that they said government cannot interfere with religion, they set religion free, and they allowed religion to do whatever religion felt the conviction to do. And that religion that they set free was, again, Christianity. What the government has made free, it is bound to keep free. In other words, our government today is bound to keep our religious beliefs free. They have an obligation based on the Constitution of this country. It is bound to keep it free. The Christian Amendment is what they call it, advocates a complete separation of church and state. Each should acknowledge the divine authority from which each derives its being. Each should have the purpose of cooperating. Notice that. What's the word? Cooperating with each other in furtherance of the best interests of all the people of the nation. This proposal proceeds from the concept that civil government is ordained by whom? God. They're trying to take that out of our Pledge of Allegiance. They're trying to take that out as our motto. In God we what? Trust. Notice this. One of the three great social institutions for the welfare of men: the home, the church, and the state. And without these three being tended to properly as they cooperate with religion, society falls apart. Taken together, they compromise the synthesis of divine wisdom for the entire scope of man's social life. We believe the Christian Amendment represents an attitude toward the relation of church and state which has been implicit in the traditions of American life and government since colonial days, and is therefore justified as an effort to have it made explicit in our federal Constitution. So, if you think about it, in other words, what they were saying is Christianity is supposed to be the accepted religion of our country, and it is important, it is essential for our young people, about all of our citizens, to understand and at least know Christianity. It doesn't say they have to be Christians, but they at least need to have a basic idea of what Christianity stands for and the moral absolutes that it teaches if we hope to keep our democracy together and our lives together in all social areas. In other words, for the republic to grow and prosper, it would have to have a citizenship well versed in the tenets of Christianity. The scriptures teach that true liberty can only be found where the truth of God is laid out and it is held in high regard. Let's look at some passage of scripture that drives this point home. John 8, verse 31. Then Jesus said to the Jews who believed in him, "If you abide in my word, and you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will what? Set you free." The reason we are losing freedom is because there is an absence of truth. 2 Corinthians 3, we've already read that just a moment ago. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And the Spirit of the Lord is less and less present in the citizenship of this country as we age as a country. Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which who made us free? Christ made us free. We're living in a world today that says we want to be free of war, of famine. We want to be free of disease. We want to be free to govern ourselves. We want to be free people. Well, I want to tell you right now, you're not going to be perfect in that area because we are all flawed individuals. But I will tell you this, the day is coming when the world will receive what they're calling for. But that will not happen until Jesus Christ comes to this earth to set up his kingdom. He is the only one who brings truth, and through truth sets people free. In all aspects of their life. All aspects. It is for this reason, I know this isn't going to sound right in our day and age, but it is for this reason the Bible ought to be a textbook in our schools. Children need to be taught what the Bible says. I'm not talking about indoctrinating them, but they ought to be taught the basics about the Bible. The Old Testament, New Testament. What's in the Old Testament? What's in the New Testament? Basic principles of which the Bible holds to, like the Ten Commandments and so forth. Our children need to be taught these things, even in the public school system. Why? Because it's based on those principles that we have our freedom. We lose the principles, we lose our freedom. They need to be taught. They need to be a part. And actually, this is the real reason why in a number of years after public schools started up and so forth, the Bible was considered a textbook. Nowadays, you walk into a school with a Bible, you have a very, very strong possibility, particularly in some states, of somebody coming up and saying you cannot bring that Bible in here. But, as in New Jersey, you can bring in literature, tapes, videotapes, and so forth of Islam to teach your kids in class. That is okay. But not Christianity. The government recognized that its authority comes from God in Christianity. Thus, we have that model. And I'm afraid our government has turned from its assigned constitutional responsibility, and it has instead worked toward the erosion of our liberties as individuals. I mean, we have seen government suppressing our liberties because government is ruling against Christianity. It's forcing upon Christianity those things which Christianity does not hold to nor approves of. Government was not to recognize any one particular religion, and yet government has done that. It recognizes atheism. And is trying to force atheism on all of us. The atheists and the secularists have charged that Christianity enslaves people in ignorance and in bondage, and the true liberty comes only when we get rid of Christianity. Are you hearing that? That's what these radicals are trying to push. See, what we're seeing in the streets today has been coming for a long time. We, over the last 40 or 50 years, have had allowed a lot of liberal professors into our public universities who then taught our teachers that are teaching in our schools today, and they have continued to build a greater and greater following. And then with our former president, who had leanings in that direction and then opened the door for even more of these liberal principles to be ushered in, we have begun to see that our government is turning against Christianity. There is talk about taking away our tax-exempt status as a congregation. There is talk of requiring that if we hire anyone, we must not show any partiality. And therefore, if, let's say, I leave and they are looking for a new pastor, you will have to consider even a man who may be gay. Or a woman. Or a transgender. This is what they're pushing for. This is what the liberals in government are trying to push. They're trying to force you to accept religious ideas that the Bible is clearly against. So we find ourselves in this situation. Well, time is gone. Let me just say this in closing. Is there hope for America? You know why there's saying that our president has caused more division in our country than any other president. This is what's being said about it. I'm going to tell you right now, he is not causing division. He is trying to move the country back in this direction, back to its Christian foundation. That's what he's trying to do. But you see, under the former president, those who are opposed to Christianity and want to get rid of Christianity, they had gained enough foothold that they thought with the new president coming in, they were hoping Hillary Clinton would come in, that this would continue to move forward. And now all of a sudden they've got someone in the office who has said, no, we will not move forward. We are going to move back in the direction that our country was founded. And that's why there is division today. Christians, it isn't a lost cause. What are we going to do? Here's what we need to do as a church. God still intends to use the church as a tool for reaching our society. How do we turn things around? We turn things around by being the salt and the light of the world. We live out our Christian ideals and we do not hide behind walls. For too many years, we have, as Christian and as a church, we've hidden behind our walls and have allowed some of this stuff to go on rather than stepping up and saying, this is wrong. Join me in my cause. We need to be the salt and the light of the earth. And if we're going to do this, we need to live the Christian life. We need to be sharing it with others. And we need to be vocal about our faith and what we believe. That means, in our culture right now, police are bad guys. I think what we need to do is we need to get on Facebook, use social media. Say, hey, I don't agree with that idea. I did that this week. Somebody posted something about police officers. I said, you know, I really believe if someone would just ride with them for a week, their whole idea about police would change 180. I said, I know that because I rode with a police officer on one of his shifts. I saw enough over those 4 or 5 hours that I have had a huge appreciation for the men and women who are in those jobs that most people would not want ever to have anything to do with. We need to speak up. Let them rail against the police. Let's speak up and say, the police, we need them. In fact, we don't need to defund them. We need to defend them, and we need to support them. And maybe even spend a little bit more money getting more of them. That we might enforce the laws of this land. It isn't just about police, but it's also about our stand on gays and transgender and so forth. I'm going to tell you right now, I've got friends up in Canada, and the one friend of mine, he is so frustrated because he doesn't believe in transgenderism, and because of it, he no longer is allowed to preach in most churches that he had been preaching in. He has been ostracized by his family. He has received threats. Almost lost his job. Why? Because he took a stand for what the Bible says. And you say, it'll never happen here. Oh, I don't know about that. The way I'm seeing things, I think it could. We need to be the salt and light of the earth, and the only way we're going to do it is that the Spirit of God has got to be allowed to work through us. For where the Spirit is, there is what? Liberty. Yeah. Father, I pray on this 4th of July weekend that we might be the citizens that you would have. Yes, we are citizens of heaven, but you've also placed us here on this earth to be citizens of this United States. Father, we're seeing some terrible things going on, and yet we're seeing some promising things. We need to get into the fight from a legal standpoint, doing what we have the freedoms and responsibilities as American citizens to address matters and to share our convictions without fear, to allow the Spirit of God to be revealed to a community that is becoming growing ever more dark. Father, help us to be the citizens you would have us to be. And I pray this in your name.